Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Somehow We Manage. Today we have another special episode and a very special guest, one that I know many of you who grew up here in the state of North Carolina are going to be very interested to hear from. The former chief meteorologist at WRAL, Mr. Greg Fishel, the first certified meteorologist here in the United States. He tells so many great stories from his time as a meteorologist. He catches us up on what he's been doing here in the past few years, and this is another great episode. So you're not going to want to go anywhere. We have another great episode for you today here at Somehow We Manage. Joining us today on Somehow We Manage is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Greg Fishel. And we're very excited to be talking to him today. Mr. Fishel, how are you, sir?
I am hanging in there. You know, every day that I get a little bit older, I'm just thankful to be here. Yeah.
Well, hey, there's nothing wrong with getting older. As I think a lot of people like to say, you're getting wiser, right?
That would be the goal. Yes, exactly. But and you know, it's funny. And I guess everybody says this is that I still think like I'm 35. But it's just that when you take that first step out of bed in the morning that you realize you're not 35 anymore.
Right. Well, I won't waste any time with you. So many people have been excited about us chatting today, and I think everybody is curious to know, what has Greg Fishel been up to over the last couple of years?
Well, I moved out of Raleigh in 2020 and went down to West Palm Beach, Florida. And the reason I went down there was that I had actually been working for a company that was actually based in Amsterdam, but they had a U.S. branch. And so I went down there, and started working for them. And then the U.S. part of that company basically blew up. It just disintegrated. And so I stayed there for a little while, but then realized that, you know what, I'm 11 hours away from everybody I care about. And so Myrtle Beach was sort of a compromise because I always wanted to live near the coast, but wanted to be relatively close to my family, you know. And so it seemed like a good mix. But you know, it's different being a resident here than it is being a tourist. You and I talked about this earlier. And I just decided very recently that I'm headed home, you know, somewhere in the Raleigh area. I don't know exactly where yet, but that's the goal. As soon as I can sell my place here, I'll be back there.
Well, I know a lot of people in that area will be very excited that you'll be heading home, as we said earlier. I want to go back to the beginning a little bit with you.
Yeah.
What was your inspiration? What inspired you to get into broadcasting and to get into meteorology?
Well, when I was a kid, I loved snow and I was petrified of thunderstorms. My dad was one of these people that would sit out on the front porch and lightning would strike 2 feet away from him, and he'd say, "Oh, it wasn't that cool." And I was in the bathroom, you know, hiding behind the commode, you know. And so I think it's one of those things where the weather consumed a lot of my energy, my mental energy, I guess. And then in 7th grade, I stumbled upon a show on public television, and it didn't take long to channel surf back then. You did have to get up out of your chair and manually turn the channel.
Right.
But there was only like 4 of them, you know. And so I found this show on public TV that was produced at Penn State. And they not only gave you the forecast, but the science behind it. And one of the guys that did it was named Elliot Abrams, who ended up being the senior vice president for AccuWeather, which is like one of the biggest private forecasting firms in the world. And so he sort of inspired me. And my parents, you know, they were just thankful I was interested in something, you know. And so Penn State was one of the best schools in the country to study that. It was in state. And so I went there and got my degree. And then my first job was in Chicago with a consulting firm where we provided forecasts for interstate railways, trucking unions, golf courses, anybody that had an economic need for weather information. And one of our clients was a radio station in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And I called in one morning and the guy said, "Have you ever thought about television?" And I said, "No, I saw myself on TV once and thought it would be a public service to stay out of the business." And so he said, "Well, there's a brand new station going on the air in Salisbury, Maryland, and I'm assuming they're going to need somebody to do the weather." So my best friend from Penn State was going to graduate school at Northern Illinois University, which was an hour west of Chicago. They had a broadcast program, and he said, Greg, after work, come on over here one day. We'll help you make a tape, an audition tape. So I made one, sent it off, and I later found out that the GM hired me against the advice of every single one of his stockholders, because we were a startup and they thought, we don't need somebody wet behind the ears. We need somebody with experience.
Right.
And he went against that and hired me. And then we had a reporter there, Ann Devlin, who took a job as a reporter with WRAL. And when she got to Raleigh, that just happened to be the time they decided, oh, let's hire our first meteorologist. And she dropped my name into that hat. And that's how that came about. So there were so many things that the dominoes had to fall just a certain way for this to work out. And if any one of those dominoes doesn't fall the right way, you and I probably aren't having this conversation right now. Right. So it sort of makes me think that maybe that's the way it was supposed to turn out.
Well, about a year ago, I had a conversation with one of your former colleagues at WRAL, Jeff Gravely, who did
yeah.
And he said part of the reason that Tom Suter wanted to create Football Friday was because they wanted to give the people in North Carolina something good to showcase their communities. Because a lot of times, if your community is being talked about on WRAL, there was a murder or there was probably some severe weather. A tree was in somebody's bedroom.
Right.
So despite that, people really took to you on the air. You've kind of grew this fan base, so to speak. So why do you think people took to you the way they did over the years?
Well, the only thing I can speculate on that is that I didn't follow the standard advice. Television stations hire consultants to tell them how to do their job, basically. Mm-hmm. And I disagreed with most of what the consultants said over the years. Like, for instance, there was one time they said, never talk about what you're not sure of. Well, my feeling on that is, if I'm not sure about something, why should I pretend to be confident when I'm not? And so just be honest and say, hey, folks, I honestly don't know how this is going to play out. Here are the most reasonable options, but we're going to have to wait, And I got a lot of positive feedback from people saying, we appreciate it when you're honest, because a lot of people in the media are not,
Yes.
And so that was one thing. I think just the fact that I wasn't a robot. It's like I didn't sit there. We have interns, or we had interns, from NC State that wanted to go into broadcasting, and they would, practice in front of the green screen. And I told them all the time, I said, look, don't worry about if your right arm is at a 90-degree angle, or you're angled this way, or you're facing this way. I said, just pretend that the camera is your mom. You just got off a school bus at the end of the day, and she said, you have 3 minutes to summarize the highlights of your day. And you had no problem doing that because you were the star of that show. And you just say, hey, this was cool. This was cool. This was a problem. After 3 minutes, you're done. And to me, that was way better than thinking, oh my God, there's 300,000 people on the other side of that camera. I'm going to die here, Just pretend that you're talking to a friend and just be honest and have fun with it.
What did a typical day look like for you as a meteorologist?
Well, when I first started, I was working Saturday and Sunday night and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday morning. And so I get used to one sleep schedule, and then a couple of days later, you have to switch to something else. But most of my career, and this was in 1989 when Bob DeBartoleben, my predecessor, retired. Mm-hmm. And so I would basically come in around 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon and prepare the forecast, make up the graphics, and then I would go home for dinner because really that was the only time I saw my wife and my kids. And then I would come back. If there was something going on, I would just stay at the station and order out pizza or something like that. But otherwise, I'd take a couple hours and then come back and do the late show. And then a lot of times I would stay there till 2 a.m. because everybody at home was asleep. So I wasn't missing any family time. And I had some projects that I like to work on, and it was quiet. There were very few people in the building at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And so that was my time to either get caught up on stuff or work on projects or whatever. And so that was basically the way things transpired.
And I've always heard that people who are in broadcasting or on the news, that they're very hard, long, sort of different hours than regular 9 to 5, and it can be
Right.
grueling work. Is that I mean, is that how you felt about it? I know you enjoyed your job, but is that how you felt about
Right.
it?
No, you're exactly right. And in fact, even now, when I don't have that schedule, determining the way I live my life, I have found it very difficult to get out of that habit. It's like my body is just used to getting up about 8 or 9 in the morning and going to bed at 2 in the morning. And I fantasize about what would it be like to go to bed at 11 and get up at 7 and like normal people, and I just haven't had the self-discipline yet to really give that a shot. But I want to, just to see what it would be like. I mean, I kid about the fact that I think God intended us to be awake when it's light and asleep when it's dark, and I've never really experienced that.
There's this notion, and I hear this all the time from older people, and take that with a grain of salt when I say older, because I'm only 23 years old. But and I had this conversation with my dad just the other day. He said it just seems like we don't get thunderstorms like we used to. He's like, when I was younger, he said it seems like the house was gonna fall in. And even I remember, and then again, this is when I was younger, but I remember there being storms where you had to huddle together in the bathroom or the utility room or wherever it was. So is there any scientific evidence to back that up? Or is that just a nostalgia thing? Oh, it's not the way it used to be type thing. Are thunderstorms less severe than they used to be, specifically here in North Carolina?
I don't know. I'm just being honest. I don't know of any studies that have indicated that. I do know that the number of reports of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes has gone up, but most people think that's because now we have people with cameras with them all the time on their phone. And so this stuff is easier to document. Whereas in the old days, something may have happened and there was no way to document it. There was no way to take a picture of it or anything else. But in terms of the intensity of lightning or the strength of the winds and all that, I do not know of anything that indicates there's a trend one way, or the other. But you know what? I do this just like everybody else does, where you start to compare things to the past, and then if you actually research it, you find out that, oh, it's not as different as I thought it was. And I think that's just human nature, to try to compare things.
Okay, and so on the same subject, people say the same thing about snow a lot of times.
Right.
So, and there's this obvious element of climate change as well.
Mhm.
Will we, and again, specifically here in North Carolina, will we see snows like we saw in the past?
Well, actually, to be honest with you, the warmer the environment gets, the more moisture there is in the atmosphere. The capacity to hold water vapor goes up. And so if you are cold enough to snow, then you can actually end up getting bigger snowstorms in a warmer world. And there's some indication, this is not proven by any stretch, but some theories out there that when the jet stream weakens because of the Earth getting warmer, and that would take more time than we had to explain why that occurs, that the jet stream ends up buckling more. Like instead of it being like this, it's like like that. And if you're in one of those extreme dips, then you can end up getting very, very cold and having a lot of cold storminess, if you will. And so for snow lovers, and I consider myself to be one of them, don't give up hope. Yes, the planet is warming, but all is not lost.
So on the subject of climate change, you have said in the past that you were not always a believer in climate
No.
change, but here in the last few years, as a scientist, you sort of have changed your views. What brought about that change, and how are you now bringing awareness to that issue?
Well, and it's funny how people have theories when they see things happen. And, people told me that, oh, you had to change. WRAL ordered you to change your opinion, or you had to change because NBC is a liberal network and all this stuff. Had nothing to do with any of that. I simply woke up one morning and realized that I was allowing my political ideology to dictate my opinion about a science issue. And ideologies and science don't work together well. And so I figured, you know what? I'm going to start reading the peer-reviewed literature. I'm going to attack this the way I attack weather forecasting. And once I did that, it was impossible for me to deny that we were, having an effect. Now, maybe we could still argue about how much, but to say that we weren't doing anything when we know for a fact, and here's a fact that a lot of people don't know. If it were not for the natural amount of CO2, leave human beings out of it, this Earth would be an uninhabitable ice ball. It would be 60 degrees colder than it is now. So CO2 is not an evil thing, but think about it. If something that's less than 1% of the atmosphere can make the difference between the planet being inhabitable and not being inhabitable, then doubling that, wouldn't it make sense that there's a chance that would have a pretty significant effect too? Now, I do want to point this out real quick, is that there are alarmists out there that are not scientists, and I think sometimes they take credibility away from otherwise credible science. Every time there's an unusual weather event, there's been unusual weather events since time began, right? So to immediately say, oh, it's climate change, that's irresponsible. I mean, you have to go back and look at it and say, okay, here's the natural part of our world. Let's separate that out. And then what do we have left after we do that? And so this immediate attribution, I have a problem with it. And these people think they're helping and they're really not. And so my go-to is peer-reviewed science. I talk to the scientists, I read the literature, and I don't really care what various media outlets say about it, because I don't trust their sources.
One of the more iconic events, not just weather events in general, I'd say in recent memory in North Carolina, was the tornadoes that came through in 1984. And obviously I wasn't, but I've heard so much about it. What do you recall about that event? Leading up to it and the aftermath of it.
What's interesting about that is that I was doing the noon show back then, and the day of and the day before, I was emphasizing the fact that I was very, very concerned that this was going to be a major severe weather event. Now, I had no clue that it was going to end up being, as cataclysmic as it ended up being, but I definitely, put that word out. And about 9 o'clock the night that it happened, we didn't have any reports of any damage at all. And I started thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I blew this out of proportion. I've lost credibility. This is not good. And it's not that I wanted there to be damage. It's just that if you play something up, and because you really truly believe it's a problem, and then nothing happens, it doesn't help people to trust you, And so that was my feeling at 9 o'clock. I get up the next morning, find out that the reason we weren't getting reports is that a lot of the communication had been knocked out down in like Maxton and Red Springs and all that. And I get up the next morning and there's 57 people dead in 2 states. And now I've gone from, oh my God, I blew this out of proportion, to I didn't do enough. And the other thing that I recall about that is that from a science standpoint, the reason that I was impressed with it turned out not to be the primary reason why it turned out to be so bad. I was looking at the large scale pattern where the jet stream was and all that. And that certainly provided a nice backdrop for the whole thing. But what happened was we had thunderstorms come through the night before, and thunderstorms have what we call outflow, where cool air descends out of the thunderstorm and then spreads out. Well, there was outflow from all these thunderstorms, and it laid down this boundary, like almost like a mini front, from about Athens, Georgia, all the way into southeastern North Carolina. And then this very small scale low pressure area formed in Georgia and moved along that boundary, and that's what set off all the tornadoes. And I didn't know enough about what we call mesoscale meteorology at that time to be able to pick up on something like that. So it was a very educational experience for me as to what to look for in the future for those kind of events. But yeah, I'll never forget. Never forget it at all.
I have to give a little bit of a shout out to Miss Carla Sutton, who actually made this interview possible today.
Oh, okay.
She reached out to you, but she told me a pretty interesting story about the tornadoes back in 1984. Her family was on the way to Disney World, so they quite literally, escaped reality.
Okay.
Realities are back home today. But she remembers you coming on the radio and saying, "Folks, I'm going to risk my reputation today and bet my reputation that today is going to be a bad day." Do you remember saying that? Is that a true story?
To that, something to that effect. I don't know. I can't remember the exact words that I used, but I do remember at the end of the newscast, sometimes we do a summary, and Denise Boyer was the co-anchor back then. And I just remember her looking at me and saying, well, let's just hope it doesn't happen. And so again, I'm not going to sit here and claim credit where I said there were going to be 35 tornadoes and they were going to be F3s and F4s and all that sort of stuff. It was just more of the upper air pattern. I had seen it many times in the plains, but I had never seen it look like that along the East Coast, and that's what got my attention, and that's why I played it up.
So another storm that caused a lot of destruction here in North Carolina, Hurricane Fran. So to the same token, what do you remember about that storm?
Well, I remember that at 11 o'clock the night that it hit, that it had jogged a little bit to the east, and the National Hurricane Center revised their track forecast and took the center up east of Raleigh, and that would have put us on the side of the storm where the winds weren't quite as bad. And it turned out that little move jaunt to the east was just a wobble. And right after their advisory was issued, it resumed its earlier track and came right up over Raleigh. And Jim Payne, who was one of my co-anchors back then, actually, I'm going to back up a second here. My wife called me at 11:30 right after the newscast and said, "Have you actually stepped outside to see how bad this is?" And I just been looking at data all night long. And she said, "You really need to go out there." And so I go out there and I see transformers blowing and trees coming down and so forth. And I ran back into Jim and I said, "Jim, you got to come out here." And he came out, and I kid about this. We had this magical moment where we looked in each other's eyes and said, "We got to go on the air from out here." So we started doing hourly updates from this breezeway that connects one building at WRAL to another. And we didn't realize that nobody had power. So only people with battery powered TV radios, could even see what we were doing. And so we did that every hour. And then Tom Suter, who lived up near Falls Lake, he asked me at 11:30, "Am I going to be okay?" And I said, "Yeah, just use common sense, And he kissed me about this to this day. He said, "Fish," he said, "you darn near killed me that night." And it was and then I learned something. There was a guy at the Department of Forestry at NC State, and I wish I could remember his name, but he explained to me, he said, "Greg, the soil type we have here, when you saturate it, it takes on the consistency of a pancake batter." And he said, "So you don't need 150-mile-an-hour winds to bring all the trees down." He said, "If you have wet soil and you have 60 or 65-mile-an-hour winds blowing on that all night long," he said, "they're going to come down." And, most of the trees that you saw down, you could see the root ball. They weren't snapped off at the top. It was like the whole root ball came up. And so, there were a lot of things about that storm I remember. I remember the live reports from outside. I remember the education about the soil. And then I remember in the cul-de-sac that I lived in at the time, that it was like a block party every night because nobody had power. And so we all had our gas grills out there, and the kids were playing in the debris. They were happy, and it was a good old time, but not to reduce the misery that storm caused.
Well, and that's something I hear about a lot is I don't know if this really happens much today, but I've heard my parents say it so many times that there was such a thing as hurricane parties, and that people gathered together when the hurricane happened, and that was just like such a foreign thing to me. Like, I was being told this at a young age, and I was like, well, this is terrible. Like, I was scared of hurricanes, but I suppose that's just the way things have changed. People gathered more, people visited more back in
Yes.
those days.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, there's a very famous story about Hurricane Camille that hit the Gulf Coast back in the 60s, and that this apartment building, these people decided to have a hurricane party, and none of them survived. It was just totally wiped out. So, the fun that we had was after the storm was over, we're sitting there trying to make the best of a bad situation. But a lot of people, if they survive one hurricane, like if you live along the Outer Banks and maybe it doesn't turn out to be quite as bad as it looked like it would be, or you just lucked out, then you start getting complacent and you start thinking, well, I rode that one out. Why can't I ride this one out? And, if it turns out to be as bad or worse than it looks, then your goose is cooked. I mean, think about Ocracoke. The only way on or off that island is by a ferry. And they stop running the ferries when the winds reach gale force. So if you're not off that island and all of a sudden the whole sea level goes up 10 to 15 feet, your goose is cooked, And so that's one of those things where take it seriously, evacuate. If nothing happens, don't be mad and don't be disappointed, be thankful. And if something bad does happen, you've done everything you can to guarantee, some success in surviving.
And something interesting that I learned was that in '96, when Fran came through, Governor Jim Hunt, the longtime governor, declared a state of emergency. And that was the first time in North Carolina history that every county in North Carolina was under a state of emergency. That was pretty interesting to me. And I'm assuming that was the severity of the storm at that time.
Oh, yeah, it was. And the thing about it is, I mean, that was a Cat 3 and a low end, quote unquote, Cat 3. So we're not talking about, the kind of a storm from an intensity standpoint that hit Florida like Ian, last summer. But it just goes to show you that sometimes the category doesn't tell the whole story. There have been tropical storms that have been stationary over parts of the United States that have just caused terrible flooding. So I think sometimes we get too caught up in the category, which is more related to the wind than it is anything else. And wind is only one of many threats that a hurricane poses.
And so a storm that came a few years later that many did not think was going to do much, but it ended up flooding, most of Eastern North Carolina, was Hurricane Floyd. What do you remember most about Hurricane Floyd?
That was a category 2, so it was one category less than Fran. Mm-hmm. But the amount of rain that it produced was just, amazing. And there was a very tight gradient of rainfall amounts on the west side of that. I mean, I think Rocky Mount, was like 5, 6, 7 inches. And then, you headed back west of Raleigh and there was like nothing, and this is what is always challenging in weather forecasting when you're going to have a gradient of conditions that's very tight. And if that zone of transition moves just a little bit, then all of a sudden, somebody that looked like they were going to get a foot of snow is now getting an inch of rain. And I used to be very honest with viewers. I said, if you live in this transition area, somebody in there is going to wake up tomorrow and think I'm an idiot. It's just, you can't avoid it, because unless you can pinpoint where that's going to be, and nobody can, then somebody is going to think the forecast was terrible. And it was.
So as I close things here, I want to finish on a much more lighthearted note.
Sure.
So you have long been a lover of the New York Mets, something that I've heard you refer to as an addiction. So how did you, because you're a Pennsylvania guy, right? How did you become a New York Mets fan?
Well, my dad was a Mets fan from their inception because he loved Casey Stengel, who was their first manager. And I was a Phillies fan. And then Tom Seaver came along and he sort of became my boyhood hero. I really respected him because not only was he good, but he seemed like just a decent human being, family man, the whole bit. And so in the beginning, not the end, but the beginning of 1969, you remember, maybe you don't, Roger Thesaurus. It was like a little paperback book, and
Okay.
it told you what words were synonyms for other words.
Right.
And I wrote on the front of that, Mets will be world champs. And of course, I was just writing it for fun. I had, they had never finished above 500. Why would I think that they were going to do that? And then they just go on this incredible tear in August and September. And the Baltimore Orioles that year were a juggernaut. Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, Boot Powell. They had 4 pitchers that, at one time were all 20-game winners. And the Mets had no business beating that team in the World Series, but everything, fell their way. And one of my best friends, I was getting on the bus the day the Mets won the series, and I couldn't find him. He was a big Orioles fan. And I went to the bus driver and I said, "Where's John?" And he said, "He is in the very back row hiding underneath the seat. He wants nothing to do with you." So that was an amazing year. It really was. And, I think it's a year that if you're a Mets fan, that stands out as, the best of all times.
So as I close here, can you, Greg Fishel, give me your top 5 Mets of all time?
Well, Tom Seaver would be number 1 for sure. And I would put Jerry Koosman, who was a pitcher in that rotation with Tom, probably at number 2. David Wright would probably be up in that top 5. Trying to think here. If we're going to current times, Pete Alonso has to be in that group. And wow, I'm trying to come up with this 5th one, and then thinking back through all these years. Going back to that 69 team, maybe Cleon Jones, who was their left fielder and hit 340, that year. So yeah, off the top of my head, that's what I come up with. If I have time to think about it, it might be revised a little bit.
Well, so maybe I should have given you that ahead of time. Maybe that's my
right. That's all right.
We'll close on that. And I just got to say, it's been such a huge pleasure talking to you today. I think I speak for so many people. I mean, you came into all of our homes here, in the WRAL viewing area in North Carolina, and watching Greg Fishel on the news was just a part of everyday life. And we all still love you and appreciate you, and wish you the very best of luck moving forward. Enjoy the rest of your time in Myrtle Beach, playing putt-putt and whatnot. Doing all those fun, wacky things out there. But then again, it's been such an honor talking to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I was just going to say that every once in a while I'll take a walk on the beach, and the scientist in me says, "What kind of a force can hold all that water down?"
So that sign, that meteorologist mind is always turning. It doesn't miss you.
Absolutely. But it's been great talking to you too. I always enjoy these conversations. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for watching us today on Somehow We Managed. Another great guest, Greg Fishel. Just a sweetheart, a great guy, very well-spoken guy with so many great stories to tell. And we wish him the very best of luck moving forward. We know he's going to continue to do great things. I actually just had a conversation with Greg off camera, and we were talking about Oppenheimer, which was, the big blockbuster of the summer. He said he hadn't seen it yet, but he did share something interesting, a little story that I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing with you guys. But he said that his father, who was a chemist, was actually recruited to be a part of the Manhattan Project, but ended up turning it down. And he didn't tell Greg this until late in his age, but he said, had I taken that job, you might not be sitting here today, and we might not be sitting here watching this interview with Greg Fishel today. But I thought that was pretty interesting. But again, thank you so much for watching. All of you who continue to watch our episodes, thank you so much. We are on all social media outlets. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and we are on Spotify now, so give us a watch there. But signing off now, this has been Caegan Jackson with Somehow We Managed. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.